A couple of days ago, we published a video on how studying 2008 Lin Dan will change the way you think about badminton, and there were some misunderstandings that we wanted to address. A lot of people like to dismiss 2008 Lin Dan as a player with phenomenal speed and explosiveness that nobody else can copy. While that is half true for some people, one of the key things people have missed from our discussion of young Lin Dan is how you can simultaneously become more consistent and make it difficult for your opponent to play. This is what 2008 Lin Dan was truly good at, and what you should be copying. Today, we'll discuss how a younger Lin Dan plays a game that allows him to prevent his opponents from playing winners and puts himself in a position to effectively use his speed and power. But before we get into the video, a quick word to our partner, NordVPN. We talked about NordVPN a few times on this channel and thought it was a good time to give them a mention again. On Get Good at Badminton, our rule is to only take on partnerships with companies whose products we actually use and believe in, and NordVPN definitely fits this description. Before partnering with NordVPN, we were already paying customers, and it has become an app that's absolutely crucial in our lives, especially with regard to this channel. Most of you are probably aware that a lot of BWF badminton content is restricted based on where you are in the world. For example, the most recent Canada Open was not available for people in Canada to watch on YouTube. But if you have NordVPN, this is not a problem at all. Simply switch your server connection to one of the many available options, and voila, you can watch the Canada Open YouTube broadcast in Canada. If you want to try NordVPN, use the link in the description or on the screen for a huge discount. It's completely risk-free with their 30-day money-back guarantee. Thanks again to NordVPN for supporting the channel. Now, let's talk about why you should copy 2008 Lin Dan. Lin Dan almost never forces shots that either result in winning or losing the rally outright. These are shots like playing spin nets off the serve or around the service line, out of position full smashes, flat pushes when you're below the tape, or any shot aiming to hit the lines. When you do the things above, you are gambling the rally where your next shot will either win or lose you the rally outright. While it's not wrong to play any of the shots we just mentioned, and there are times where gambling for your shot does make sense, players today gamble on their shots way too often. And it is the reason why seemingly anybody can beat anyone in men's singles. In fact, Lin Dan himself started doing more of this after 2010, which is why we're not huge advocates of actually trying to play like post-2010 Lin Dan. Yes, it is a style that seems more realistic to execute, in the sense that you don't need the same explosive power and speed that pre-2010 Lin Dan played with. But post-2010 Lin Dan was also just worse. You can actually hear it in a discussion during the 2011 World Championships, where commentator Gillian Clark talks about how a coaching and Lin Dan's style change was worse for him.
I think his influence on the way that Lin Dan is playing now has changed Lin Dan's outlook on the game of how he's approaching it. And maybe not for the better.
We agree with this sentiment. After 2010, Lin Dan's performances weren't actually that good. He was upset way more often by lower ranking players. And a lot of people were actually discussing if he was preparing to retire during that time for good reasons. He made way more mistakes in 2011 than 2008. And his opponents had far more opportunities to get the attack and put pressure on him. On the other hand, 2008 Lin Dan was a player that his opponents felt like they couldn't do anything against and could only try to keep up. Of course, we don't expect everyone to have or develop the same explosive power as 2008 Lin Dan, but there are elements in his game that are extremely beneficial for anyone to understand and copy. We mentioned that 2008 Lin Dan does not gamble with his shots, but what does that actually look like? For one, Lin Dan's shots rarely ever pin the lines, and you almost never see him hit out on the sides. Two, Lin Dan puts a lot of emphasis on taking the net early. It is much easier to get the shuttle over the net when you're playing the shot around your chest level compared to playing with your racket at your knees. And to build on the second point, play shots that allow for quick follow-ups to take the net early, like his renowned stick smash that requires little full body commitment. Or if that's not possible, play shots that give yourself time to recover, like high clears and lifts as needed.
有那个高球100没有打死，太可惜。
One major reason we talked about the idea of playing to attack your opponent's body control is because it's an easy way to think about the game, to play more like 2008 Lin Dan. Instead of looking to set yourself up for smash winners with good spin nets, or tiring your opponent out by moving him around the court, you can think of the game where you simply attack your opponent's body control until they inevitably play a loose shot that you can guarantee a kill on. This way, you're just focused on playing shots with good angles and speed, and if you can sustain these type of rallies longer than your opponent, they'll eventually be the one losing body control and playing worse shots. At least for us, having this type of mindset significantly reduces the number of unforced errors that we make, because we're not thinking so much about how everything needs to be perfect. In other words, you don't really care that your opponent is getting your shots back, as eventually they'll play a shot that'll give you a guaranteed winner. Now, we talked about how Lin Dan generally does not gamble on his shots, which reduces his own chances of making an error. The second part is about making your opponent's gambles even more risky. For example, think about spin nets. Are you more likely to net roll when you're close to the net or far from the net? Probably when you're closer to the net. Since 2008, Lin Dan was not the one to take chances and compete to see whose spin net was better. He almost always played blocks toward the service line. If his opponent wanted to spin net, it would be a huge gamble that often did not play out for them, as you can see here from Lee Chong-wei in the 2008 Olympic finals. In fact, we can draw parallels in this match with Lin Dan's match against Lee Chong-wei in the 2011 World Championships. In 2011, Lee Chong-wei, as well as other players that played Lin Dan, had a ton more opportunities to spin net and attack. He was noticeably on the defensive more often, and that is why Lin Dan's matches in 2011 were much closer than they were in 2008.
Square one. Cross. Oh. That's wide.
Similarly, the angles that Lin Dan produced on his pushes in 2011 were worse than they were in 2008, especially to his opponent's forehand side. These pushes were much easier for Lin Dan's opponents to cut off and initiate drive battles, which is a gamble where you're betting on having a better drive game than your opponent. To 2008 Lin Dan, on the other hand, played his pushes higher and passed his opponent. This made it difficult for his opponents because they had to jump into the shot or take a late forehand or backhand. Additionally, high pushes helped Lin Dan's footwork rhythm because it always gave Lin Dan time to adjust his feet and prepare for the next shot. Speaking of preparing for the next shot, pushing high is one of the reasons why Lin Dan's anticipation skills are so good and something you can immediately implement into your own game. When you push high and see your opponent moving fast into the shot with jumps or quick shuffles, that's a sign to prepare for defense. However, if your opponent takes slower steps instead and looks to take a late shot, you should be anticipating a front court shot or flatter clear. One thing Lin Dan frequently does is position his legs for the flat clear, but closely watches the front court. The more late your opponent is and the lower they're taking the shuttle, the closer you should be to the front court. If your opponent is below the tape, for example, there's no way that they'll be hitting a shot going downwards on your side. And the more late they are, the more difficult it is to whip a high clear that you can't cut off. At the end of the day, 2008 Lin Dan ultimately was a super explosive player, and replicating that same explosiveness is an extremely challenging task and not possible for certain players. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't learn from 2008 Lin Dan and at least try to copy some elements of his game. For example, even if you don't have as explosive of a backcourt, you could study how Lin Dan plays his pushes and be a player who controls the front court. Everyone should also understand the idea of how certain shots like spin nets or trying to pin the lines with a full smash can be gambles that are not worth it. With this in mind, you can copy Lin Dan by playing shots that stack the odds against your opponent and make these gamble shots more unlikely to succeed. And in your own training, You can also consider spending more time practicing similar shots that 2008 Lin Dan used to become a player who makes fewer mistakes, while simultaneously forcing more mistakes from your opponent. Some of these shots include high pushes, stick smashes, cross nets, and blocks toward the middle. And your biggest focuses when you practice these shots are speed and angle rather than placement. That said, at the end of the day, you can play however you would like to play and should play in a way that you enjoy. Thus, let us know in the comment section below who you would like to play similarly to. And as always, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button so you don't miss out on our future videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.